Shalom, and welcome to Parsha Talk. Thank you for joining us. We are so happy to see you. I am Rabbi Elliot Malamed in Highland Park at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, as always, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, Anshe Chesed in New York City. It's great to see you. How was your Thanksgiving? Let's start off by that. Barry, I saw you got a haircut, beard cut.
I did. Thanksgiving was great. It was very small. This is the first time since 1996 that we weren't with the same two families. We've celebrated Thanksgiving for almost 25 years with the same two families. So this year we were able to Zoom with them. So that was actually nice. It's something that we could do in the year 2020 that we couldn't have done years ago, obviously. But, Thanksgiving, there's always a lot to be thankful for. So Absolutely. It was a good holiday.
Jeremy, how was yours?
Lovely, although I had one child. He tested negative ultimately, but Yedidia was exposed to someone, and so he didn't come. He stayed quarantined in his house, but in the end he was fine. He didn't have it.
Oh, terrific, wonderful. Well,
And what about you, Elliot?
I had a great Thanksgiving. It was me, Kim, Oliver, Mayan. We all had a great time. Pumpkin risotto.
Nice.
Vegan. Yes, absolutely. All right, we're going into Vayishlach. Vayishlach, one of the most important parshiot in the Torah.
You have to change your cue card, Elliot. You say that every week.
Every week, but it's
always true too.
Always true. And look, it starts out with a delegation. Yaakov is sending a delegation to his brother. He's coming back from Haran, as we talked about last week. There's just so much he has to deal with. So Barry, take us into this moment where at the very beginning of the Parsha, the Pasuk says, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lepanav.
It begins with Jacob sends malachim across the river. And it's an interesting thing. The word malach means both messenger and angel. And there's often a degree of tension as to what we're actually talking about in any given scene. Here it seems pretty clear from the Torah itself that Jacob is sending a few of his men as a scouting party ahead or a diplomatic mission to prep for the great meeting. And Rashi has what seems to me to be a very curious comment that he's actually sending real angels. And you wonder, first of all, how Jacob has access to these angels. But even so, it just is so striking that in the context it seems altogether, but the malach plays a big role in the story, and it carries us through all the way, I think, to the end of the meeting, because when Jacob is going to meet Esau, he's going to say that it's as if I saw God, and his vision of God is very much wrapped up in that embrace with the angel.
Well, of course, the whole story begins with Malachim. Malachim olim v'yiratim. This is the sulam, the dream. And in fact, some commentators point out the fact that we are talking about the angels that escorted him on the way out of the land and the angels that are escorting him on the way into the land. And so it may not be that far-fetched to say that he has access to these celestial beings. I don't know, Jeremy, you want to take a shot at that one, or we'll go to the next piece, which is, the sense of, take us into his character, take us into the emotional depth here, the complexity. What's going through his mind? Yeah.
Well, there's so much complexity about Yaakov, and is there a scene in all of biblical, in all the Bible that works on so many levels, both narrative and also psychological, of Jacob, what Jacob has to confront and wrestle with. He has to separate out his family so that into two camps, so that Esav, whom he thinks is going to exact vengeance, won't kill the whole kit and caboodle all at once. He separates them out and puts Rachel and Joseph in the back so that they are the most defended. By the way, how complicated must his relationship be with the rest of those kids who sends to the front lines as he's protecting Rachel and Leah, especially Rachel and Yosef.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. The Torah is a little foreshadowing of the the breakdown in the sibling relationship. But Barry, you want to say something?
Well, Vayishev, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
seems pretty clear that that sets up the Vayishev story where the 10 brothers are against Yosef. And maybe they're, holding it against him from the river scene. But I'm curious how you see the whole scene playing itself out. So Jacob, when we left him last week, he was running away from Laban, and he's coming back home. So if Esau is meeting him, he must have sent some kind of message saying, it's been a long time. I'm looking forward to seeing you. But he's not acting like that. Right?
Who is not? Yaakov or Esav?
Jacob is acting as if he's petrified.
He
If we would
petrified.
coarser language.
Because I sent a gift to Esav, and I asked my human or divine messenger to send the gift to Esav. The messenger comes back and says, "Oh, Esav's eager to see you. He's got 400 men with him."
Right, which reminds us that he has more men than Abraham took to war.
He has the size of a battalion with him, and he's a gang leader. And I mean, the Torah does an effective job of setting up the contrast between Jacob as a family man and the nation, the kernel of the nation, and Esav as a kind of gangland figure.
Right.
Al charbecha tichayeh
Absolutely.
is what Isaac had said to him, to Esav. You're going to live by the sword, okay? And so Jacob says, let's. I'd like to see Esav. And Tony Soprano is coming out with 400 guys, and it's a very intimidating moment. So Esav, of course, as we know, as the modern reader knows, the ancient readers, I think, were much less generous. Esav comes off much less violent, obviously.
He seems benign.
He does. It seems like he has actually given a measure of forgiveness.
Right, and it's a complete role reversal, right? This isn't the picture of Yaakov as Ishtam and Esav as the hunter and the great man of the outdoors who lives, as you said, by the sword and dies by the sword, as it were. He seems more of a domestic type, and Yaakov is the wily lord or the sheikh.
Esav,
No, I think Yaakov, right? He's dividing his camp. He's going to combat. Right? He's presenting a combat mode.
You said the phrase as the description of Yaakov back from Parsha Toldot, Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim, and Tam, with that nice range of semantic meanings, can mean pure, as in a sense of moral purity. It can mean a sense of naivete. It can mean, as in the Haggadah, sense of a simpleton, but it's pretty ironic because Jacob is certainly none of those things.
And
in contrast to,
he's vulnerable here. He's vulnerable because he's got children with him. He's got his 4 wives with him. He's got the retinue. He's got all of his possessions with him. He's coming from a long journey. There are tremendous vulnerabilities here. And the fact that he is defined by family, and the fact that Esav is defined not by family, defined by what is essentially either military or a gang persona here.
I'm sorry, you could say that Esau is defined by his family, meaning his brother. Right? Yaakov is only concerned about his family,
right?
What he got in Haran and Padam Aram, and Esau is going to meet him with open arms because he's going to embrace his brother. That's his family.
So what you're saying is that what's defining this moment for Esav is no sense of violence. No, it's just a sense of where have you been? What have you been?
Yes, I think that the way the pshat or semantic narrative quality is about Esav here, and what we don't have access to is maybe Jacob's sense of intimidation was correct, that he came with 400 guys because he intended to exact vengeance, and then when he sees him, it's no longer possible. That's possible, or maybe he never intended violence.
There are a couple of stages before that. First of all, Yaakov has this moment of prayer, Katonti mikol hachasadim mikol hamet, beautiful modern Israeli song. He says, Kiva makli avarti, I went over with this staff, which I went over with nothing. Only had potential, and now I have this, Shnei machanot, and he wants to be saved. And then he sends these like a parade of gifts to him, right? Izim matayim tiashim. I often like to make a point of the ratios between male to female animals in the different flocks that he sends them. 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats. That's 1 to 10, one male for every 10 females. That's not a subtle message to your brother who is, the masculine of the masculine here. 10 bulls and 40 cows, 20 she-asses, 10 he-asses. I mean, this is some significant, subtext here.
By the way, I often think that we can go back to what it means, but like when the Bible tells you a story that is heavily ideologically laden, you say, okay, it's telling us, what we're supposed to think, or who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. This is probably, at least at some level, like just a little bit of animal husbandry data in the ancient world. Like, how did it work? How did, if you were taking care of a flock of donkeys or a flock of camels, how many males and females did you need? And this one gives you this, like, just the details of how it was that you did that.
No, I think these are starter flocks. He's giving him a start. It's like, you get your starter, I don't know how to get your starter seeds. Yeah,
that's right. The little packet of seeds. Packet of seeds if you want to grow green peppers. And if you want to grow donkeys, this is what you need.
Well, no, so maybe what Jacob is doing is he's trying to project onto Esau. Look, I'm a herdsman. I am this domesticated person, living the paradigm of the shepherd, and I'm giving you the starter material.
So you're suggesting then that Yaakov is trying to civilize Esau,
I think,
right? Because otherwise, who does he think Esau is?
I think that's a wonderful point. It's something I never thought about. But this
right,
is
if he's giving him starter flocks, the implication is that this is not who Esau is, right? Absolutely. You don't give someone who has a whole herd to themselves a couple of sheep to get going.
I'm going to quote you in shul this week. This is a marvelous chidush in the sense that this is exactly what's going on. Esau is the untamed wild man, but organized in terms of war, in terms of battle, and Yaakov is the attempt at the civilized man. Okay, so now this sets up our confrontation because after sending all these gifts, Yaakov dispatching his family, it says Vayivater. He is alone.
So let's be clear here. Jacob's family is on the west side of the river.
Yeah.
Right? And Jacob's going to go back on the east side in the foreign land for his wrestling match with the angel.
Okay. He goes back.
And that also is kind of striking. You would think that Jacob would go first, leave everyone behind, and have the wrestling match as it were in Eretz Yisrael and Canaan, but it seems to be the opposite.
By the way, just real quick, you're speaking about this, and I don't really have enough knowledge to say this intelligently, but you're speaking about it, Barry, as if the river is the Jordan, and that he's east side, but it's Ma'avar Yavok. It's the Yavok, which
is an east-west river, not a north-south river, right?
Right.
But it's still separating the land from Eretz Canaan, I think. Right? You have to go across the Jordan to get into Canaan. That is the entire eastern border.
That's right.
Right, from the Kinneret to Yam HaMelech, it's the Jordan River.
Right. But first of all, the story, the richness of the story about Jacob being all alone, Vayivater Yaakov levado, he's separated from his family. His family is, at whatever level, exposed to, he's a little closer to Esau. Jacob is hanging in the back. Maybe he's trying to protect himself, but discovers that he's actually got to have this confrontation anyway.
Okay, one other idea.
I just wanted to point out the one thing is the river, the name of the river, Yabok, and he's Yaakov, the confrontation with self is so beautifully told in that name of the river. He's got to keep crossing the self to
And
be left alone.
I mean, it's overt. Vayivater Yaakov levado. He is left by himself.
Right, and he's without God. And I think this is the key point. Once he crosses into the land of Israel, he's protected by God. And in fact, that may be why he sends the family over, because they'll become under the divine protection. So when he's back on the east side of the river, the north side, however we want to see it, Huslars, I think that for sure we can say, he is completely alone.
Okay, so let's get into the wrestling match, and then we got to get into the reconciliation. The wrestling match is one of the most profound moments in the entire Torah. Really, it's a moment that shapes identity because of what happens. It's a moment that literally marks Yaakov in the body. It's a moment of confrontation,
and it marks his descendants too in their dietary laws.
For the Gid HaNasheh, the sinew, what it's called, the Gid HaNasheh, and it's also based on a bit of a pun. But let me take you into the text, and I'm just gonna you'll comment, okay? So, Vayavek ishimo adalot hashachar. A man wrestles with him. We don't know the unnamed assailant. Vayar kilo yachol lo. He sees that he doesn't prevail against him. Vayiga bekaf yerecho. He wrenches Jacob's hips at its socket. Vateka kaf yerech Yaakov, and the socket was strained. Veheavko imo. Vayomer shalcheni, send me. Ki ala shachar, because it's dawn. Vayomer lo ashalechecha, I will not send you. Ki im berachtani, until you bless me. Okay, so take it from there. How do you see this moment? What happened in the match? Who won? Who lost? What's going on there? Why the blessing?
Well, I think the first thing we have to recognize is that it's a name changer. And I think what's important here is, as you're telling the story, you're reading it in Hebrew, and it's a lot clearer in Hebrew that the pronouns have no references.
Absolutely.
That we can't separate out Yaakov from the Malach. So we don't know who's winning and who's losing. And we don't know what's happening to whom, and we're inferring things based on later action.
So literarily speaking, it's presented in such a cloud. We get the rabbis talk about avak, the dust comes in. So imagine you're wrestling on a dusty, sandy surface, and that's all you see. If you're the spectator, all you see is the dust. And so, but we're the reader here, and the reader doesn't even know, at what point one is prevailing or another. I mean, and I'm not a big wrestling fan, but lately I've been watching some videos just to get for anthropological purposes, of course.
Of course.
and that's the whole trick of wrestling is, at one point one wrestler is up, another point another one is up, and they work it out at the beginning, and of course at the end everyone is a winner basically, even though there's a victor and a loser. But we'll talk about it in a second. I mean, the text throws up a lot of dust for us.
It's like a typical Jewish sports league. Everyone gets a trophy at the end of the season. But I think that, we haven't really talked about who the Malach is, who Jacob is wrestling with.
Who the Ish is.
Right. And the way we've described it so far suggests that is what supports the idea that Jacob is really wrestling with himself. And that's why the pronouns perhaps are indeterminate, because it's someone outside of himself, it's someone within. And then it would not be necessarily a literal wrestling match, but a metaphorical wrestling match.
May I offer the following, which is that I was reading the commentary of Yair Shakovich. I mentioned it last week also, and he says that there are hints here of earlier stories and earlier mythologies going on. In fact, that the assailant was God, and that the biblical writers were very uncomfortable with an anthropomorphic, presentation here, and they had to strip it away. And the closest that they would get is to have the angel as an angel, and not as a real person. And of course, the psychological interpretation is that he's wrestling with himself. I mean, even mythologically, there's an aspect of self, but that God is wrestling with him, and that he is, named for the one that wrestles with God. I'm not particularly, how do we interpret Yisrael? That's a question that we can ask in a second. But there's the adversary is not only that himself, the adversary, he's actually wrestling with the divine.
So this reminds me of the story with Moshe and
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that's quite right. That there is. First of all, we have any number of midrashic tales about angels not liking human beings, and the angels feeling competitive with human beings, and the angels saying don't create human beings and stuff like that. The angels, there's a so to speak sibling rivalry in midrashic traditions about angels, and so an angel, whether it was originally Kadosh Baruch Hu Ba'atzmo, like God, or some heavenly being, it works to say that there is, as Barry said. I was also thinking about Moshe and the who was attacked by an angel because of the Hatan Dami, because of the failure to circumcise. But I think that, like any good poetry or any really rich mythology, it unduly reduces it to say it is X or it is Y, or it stands for X or it stands for Y. I think that all the psychological reading is incredibly vivid. Otherwise, the Torah would never have said stuff like he was there all alone, and the name of the river is his own name with letters transposed. But I think the pshat, or like simple semantic thing, must have been something like a standstill with Esav's guardian angel. That just seems to, I mean, that's not just me, but it seems a very plausible pshat to say that he's got to confront Esav, and that may involve self-confrontation, having cheated Esav out of his brachot. But there he's has to contend with the spirit of his brother, and by the way, it's a standstill.
So it's
Go
more
ahead.
powerful than that, because it's not just a standstill, I think. So in the earlier scene, he tricks Esau and he tricks his father. And so he is able to prevail with his wits. Here he prevails with strength. He holds on to the angel, and the angel can't let go. And so in a sense, he's become Esau, because Esau is a physically powerful twin and Jacob is not. And I think that, the one thing that we haven't really talked about is that this interchange between the human and the divine plays itself out at several points in the story. It becomes the name of the place, Peniel. He saw God. And it also is going to be when he meets Esau, he's going to say, now I can't remember the exact verse, but it's as if I saw God. Seeing you is as if I saw God.
Right.
And that's a very powerful statement. I think it.
So what do you think? First of all, that the motif of the place being Peniel and seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, and there are other, like Sarita im Elohim v'im anashim batuchal, you have contended with, wrestled with. There's there's no obvious Hebrew word that Sarita correlates to, and so wrestles with is one common translation, but so is lashur, to see, to gaze upon. And there's a midrash that calls Yisrael Ish Ra'el, the person who saw God. So I think that that's a very plausible reading here, that this is about a revelation, and that's so beautiful on multiple levels. One of which is that when Jacob sees the human Esav and says, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God," it's a really beautiful moment of human connection.
Can we take it back one step? Because the desire for the blessing, I'm not going to let you go. Lomar ashalecha ki im berachtani. we relate so beautifully to that moment, which is the moment at the end of the match, where in order for the match to end properly, the combatants have to signal to each other a kind of acceptance. I mean, and we can all relate to it from our favorite sports, where the opponents shake hands at the end. I'm thinking about the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs, of course, where they line up. But this is true, in every sport, in tennis, for example, at the end of a match, if you don't see the handshaking at the end of the match, it leaves the audience with a feeling of dread. I do want to comment.
Think of how intense this is about I've never seen one of those UFC fights, but in boxing, that's especially true. The guys pound the crap out of each other, literally try to draw blood from their noses and eyes, and then they hug.
Yes, and they hug, and the reason why they hug is because they are saying many things. They're saying, you have made me a better player, you have made me a better boxer, you have made me a better human being, a better man. And now the hug enables us to traverse a boundary into reality. And that for the moment for the evening that they are fighting, reality has been suspended. I mean, I've talked about all the dust there. And now that the sun is rising, we have the literal boundary of day and night. We have, things it has to end on the right note. It has to end with grace.
So the way you picture it, Elliot, is as if the angel is going to go off sulking, and then Jacob says, you have to say good game.
Absolutely. And you can't do that to an angel. You can't ruin the angel's day. The angel has to go off and pray to God. The angel you can't put the angel in a bad mood. You can't, but it's upsetting to the entire cosmos, is what I'm saying, that on the level of sport, and those of us who are engaged in it, I don't think I'm as engaged half as much as other people. But when you don't see that kind of camaraderie or that kind of sportsmanship at the end of the match, it's a soul-crushing moment to the viewer. Right? You need that. You need that from a ritual perspective. Okay, I want
to return for 1 second though to a couple of points. Barry said it's not a standstill because Jacob kind of prevails. He said to prevail. It's somewhat true. Obviously, the Torah says you contend with God and humanity and prevail. On the other hand, and he gets a blessing. He does get the blessing. He does get this new name, which is an obvious, benefit or compliment or whatever. But it's also true that Vayar ki lo yachol lo, and as we said before, it's not clear that who is seeing, who cannot conquer, so that they do kind of wrestle to a standstill. And Jacob leaves this injured, right? And he is limping. The word thigh in the Bible very often is a euphemism for the thigh region, and not just the thigh itself. So there is a kind of, not, I don't know, like a dirty joke or almost a side,
a low blow.
A low blow perhaps is related to this conflict between Jacob and the angel. And I think that this is a very intense moment. It's not a clear resolution. The second thing I wanted to say just is about, to the extent that this is representing Esav, the angel is representing Esav, and that phrase about "I won't let you go until you bless me," I think is a suggestion, when we're going to talk in a second about the nature of the reconciliation or non-reconciliation or whatever it is. It is a suggestion that the Esav force, this angelic Esav force, maybe is oriented to forgiveness, maybe is oriented to saying, Jacob says, listen, we've been through a lot. I need to know that you want me to have a blessing. I need to know that you're not, harboring desire to kill me. Do you have it in you, Esav or Esav guardian angel, to wish me the word that we were using before in our conversation, before the show started, is grace. Do you wish me chanina? Do you wish me that benefit? And that's, I think, a huge question that is always present in when people wrong each other and when they give forgiveness. With forgiveness, do we just say, all right, the debt's clear, but I still hate you? Or do we say, we've been through a lot and I really wish you well now?
Well, Barry,
what I would add is the way that you have read it just now suggests that it's actually restorative, because Jacob needs the blessing from the firstborn. He is now going to get the Bechorah from the true Bechor. And maybe that's the importance of the blessing, is that in being blessed by Esav, he recognizes that what happened 2 weeks ago does not have the reality that he thought was attached to it. That in fact, Esau is the Bechor. He should have been the recipient of the blessing. Jacob took it, and now I think Jacob acknowledges that the blessing has to come from Esau here as well.
All right, quickly, your view of the reconciliation. Vayichabkehu, vayipol al tzavarav, vayishakehu, vayivku. He ran to him, Esav ran to him, embraced him, falling on a neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Genuine, not genuine, full reconciliation, half, or unsuccessful? Barry.
I think from Esau's point of view, it's a full reconciliation. I think that Jacob is conflicted. I think he wants it to be a full reconciliation, but as you know, we spoke before we started taping, I think there is a sense that the destinies of the two brothers is different and they cannot live together. They don't have to live at war, but they also cannot live as family.
Jeremy?
And therefore, the reconciliation is limited.
Basically agree. Basically agree.
Yeah, we want it to be a reconciliation, but we just know this character too much that he's carrying a lot of the past with him. You know, I showed you the video of Frank Sinatra bringing Dean Martin.
You got to describe it to our many listeners what you showed us.
So you got to go to YouTube and see the 1976 Jerry Lewis telethon where Frank Sinatra, you know, is chatting with him, giving him all sorts of, you know, things, and he says, "Oh, by the way, I have someone wants to see you," and he pulls out Dean Martin, who they haven't seen each other in 20 years after a bitter, you know, breakup. And they just hug and they kiss. And you see in this moment, you know, there's genuine reconciliation, but there's also kabdeo v'chashdeo, a little bit of suspicion. There's a kiss. And, you know, the rabbis make a whole deal out of the vayishakeu, that he didn't kiss him, he bit him, you know, and it's filled with that ambiguity. And I can't think of a better way to describe this moment, which is one person, the more vulnerable, I think, is Esav. And because he's leaving it all out there, and Yaakov he's still got some stuff in the past.
I think that last point that you just made is really very much right on point. That Esav throughout this story has been the vulnerable one, and that though we say Yaakov ish tam, and if tam, that the meaning of tam includes a certain naivete, actually Esav is the naive character, and Jacob is the wily character. And I think you got it right on. Esav has done well. He doesn't need the gifts, even though Jacob is really quite abundant and has great gifts for him. But Esav says, "Okay, let's get together." And Jacob says, "You ride on ahead," and he runs in the opposite direction. Jacob doesn't reciprocate Esav's desire to share the family, and it may be the case, as Barry alluded to before, that in the Torah's seder of priorities, the Torah wants to stress that the people of Jacob need to be different from, not connected to the other residents in the area, and Edom just cannot be part of Israel.
Absolutely.
But you know, I think that as we felt in Parsha Toldo, we feel for Esav now, who does appear to be needing his difficult brother's approval.
So Jacob I mean, Esau is very much like Isaac. He's always at home in the land. Jacob is not. And there's a sense of rootlessness almost to Jacob. And the part of the story that the Parsha that we're going to skip this week, obviously, for time reasons, his rootlessness is exposed even further. So even though he wants to be a good neighbor, he can't be a good neighbor.
It's just so
And
much. Go ahead. I just want to say there's just so much complexity that just lingers on, from this moment.
it does linger on because I think that, the existential tensions are existential because they persist throughout human history, not because, we reach a resolution here. And this is, it's a tension between Galut and Eretz Israel, and it's a tension between being at home in the world and not being at home.
It would probably be a good place to say we have to leave it because it's unresolved. We have to leave it.
Teiku, yeah.
So I just want to say about that point, what I really, among the things that I really appreciate and resonate with is that you have done a great job, Barry, of taking a story about two individuals and showing how it connects to the mythic story of the people.
Absolutely.
And that's I think really, the three of us, one of the, if I can say such a thing, one of the reasons this I think works with us is that we're successful at doing that, trying to take the stories and showing what they mean on a religious level as Jews.
We know these people.
I concur wholeheartedly.
We know these people,
Believe
and they are us too. We are all in these characters, and that's the real truth. Well, oh my God! So we reached the end of this time. We haven't even touched the surface as usual, but it's been great talking with you. We'll see you next week.
It's been wonderful.
Shabbat shalom
Yes.
from our
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, guys.
See you next week. Parsha Talk.